Welcome. My name is Clark Buckner. I am the director at Telematic Media Arts, where we are currently featuring Carla Gannis's Wunderkammer, an evolving exhibition of new work in XR. What to say? The gallery is open. The exhibition is open. You can, and also to say the show extends from the gallery, yes? In fact, it features physical objects, it features works in AR, it features VR, and the VR now is also accessible online as social VR. And you can find the links to that social VR and visit the Wunderkammer yourself, yes, on our website at telematic.com. Yes, let me introduce that. Again, we're also open to visits by individuals and small groups. We will mask up and keep our distance, but we come down and see the show in person. If you have the chance, it'll be up until October 8th. And I also want to take the moment to say that we are going to have another presentation in conjunction with the Wunderkammer show next week, Saturday, October 3rd at 2 p.m. And Carla then will be in dialogue with the comparative literature scholar, Charlotte Kent, and the computer scientist, Ahmed El Gamal. And again, that's next week, October 3rd. So now I want to hand over the floor to artist Carla Gannis and critic scholar Dorothy Santos. Dorothy and Carla proposed introducing themselves, so I will sign off. Welcome again, and I will field questions here. Stream is working on this end. If you have questions, you can post them in the chat on Twitch, and I will relay them to Carla and Dorothy as the opportunity presents itself. All right, welcome again. Carla, Dorothy.
All right, Dorothy, why don't you start?
Sure, and I also just wanted to say, so this is Dorothy Santos. I'm wearing a black shirt, has a tiger on it, have clear glasses on, shaved head. I am in front of a tinted green, I never took the time to paint my apartment wall, and I'm sitting on a patterned kind of orange chair. And I also just wanted to state that even though we're in the digital space, I did want to do a land acknowledgement really quickly. I hope that's okay, Carla. And just to acknowledge and pay our deepest respect, at least on my end, as well as, and I please forgive me, you'll have to let me know this, but the land acknowledgement on my end is just the deepest respect to the Ohlone people, elders and ancestors, past, present, and future. And just to acknowledge that we offer this deep gratitude to the Ohlone land and the water that supports us as we have this conversation. And hopefully we invite everyone to join in that acknowledgement, respect, and gratitude. And the quick intro for me, because I really just want to get straight to the conversation with Carla, and I want you to obviously introduce yourself, is I'm a writer, I'm a forever student, and I love weird things, which to me aren't weird, but to some people they are. And I do have a contentious relationship with the critic scholar thing that we can talk about, Carla. I don't need to kind of belabor that point right now, but that's who I am. And I'm a huge fan of Carla's work. I've been for many years.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. And thank you, Clark, as well, for hosting us today. I am in Brooklyn, New York, several thousand miles away from all of you. But I'm really thrilled to be here in the evening for me. A little bit about me is I started out as a painter, as Dorothy knows, you know, my biography and Clark, and many years ago now, about 25, I moved to New York City, and I realized these canvases where I was applying pigments just was not satisfying to me anymore. And I began to, I had come from a really small town. My ideas of art were very, very kind of, you know, limited, limited in terms of how, you know, one perceives big ideas in art, in the art world. I'll say the art world, but as we know, there are many art worlds and many different kind of positionalities we can take in it. So I'm not going to go through my entire biography, but today I feel like I'm producing work that really is about these uncanny complications between grounded reality, or because grounded reality feels very ungrounded now, and virtual reality, or these very different states of reality. Earlier today, I was actually in a talk, and we, the other panelists and I agreed that we deal with all the R's, right? But something else about my work is I take a very horror vacui approach. So that means I'm culling from all of these different places, particularly speculative fiction, emerging technologies, but also art and literary history, and with all the complications that come with that. I also teach at NYU in integrated digital media, and that's the name of the program. And Dorothy, I would like to just ask you about the complications of the critic scholar, though.
Oh gosh, okay. I mean, I sat on a panel last year about art criticism, and one of the first things I said was, I'm not a critic. I write about art, and I've never really liked that term, and I think a lot of it is because I don't see myself, nor do I want to see myself as some kind of tastemaker. I'm not, you know, I'm not trying to do that for people. I think people come into, you know, the importance and significance of the interventions that need to come into their life on an intellectual, emotional level when they need to. And I think, and yeah, it's kind of a really tough place for me, because as someone who is in grad school and, you know, thinking about and writing about all these really complex ideas, sometimes it does feel, it's not that I shun what I'm doing, but there's a part of me that it's become all the more aware to me, for me, that I need to kind of take the knowledge that I'm learning and help it, you know, produce, you know, an intervention on my own, you know. And I think that's one of the things that one of my mentors at UC Santa Cruz, you know, James Doucette Battle, always asked me, like, every time I would describe what I was doing to him, you know, like for like the class, you know, what was the purpose of the paper I was writing, for instance, or like what's the purpose of these big ideas? You want to look at, you know, telephone technology, or like that's your object of study, and you want it to relate to how, you know, telecommunications has been used to collect data in biotech. So like, why? Tell me, what is your intervention? Why do you care so much? And for me, I'm so much more comfortable, you know, as someone who is just seen as what I've always wanted to be seen as, someone who like makes things. If you want to call that an artist, that's fine, and a writer. But to call me a critic and to call me a scholar, I feel like I'll be doing that practice for the rest of my life. And those words for me alone, they're very hierarchical, and that's just not. I'm increasingly non-hierarchical in my thinking about, you know, a lot of the things I do in my life, even the stuff that I'm making and working on. I'm realizing, oh wow, these are the interventions I want to see out in the world, and they're not based in hierarchy.
They're not based in hierarchy, but also, I mean, I think your work, like, there's so much kind of crossover and cross-pollination, right? So it's really difficult to like quantify it or label it. But we live in a culture where it's like we have to have labels so that it's easy to categorize everything, right? And so even like working on this Wunderkammer project, we were talking about the absurd. By the way, Dorothy and I had this great phone conversation. And once I get over like my stage fright, because the first couple of minutes I'm always like, you know, I hope it'll just be like our phone conversation a week ago, because I was like, we should have just recorded this phone conversation and broadcast that. But you know, that has been one of the things in working with the Wunderkammer, realizing what an absurd proposition it is to try to categorize all of these things. But we live in this world. I mean, even, you know, if we think about titles within academia, and if we're going to function or participate, you know, in culture, you know, it's something, it's either do we assimilate or do we, you know, one thing I always ask my students to do is to make up new titles for themselves, titles that don't exist, titles that can be amorphous, titles that can, you know, kind of expand our sense of what one can do, or the parameters or frameworks, right? And it can embrace hybridity and fluidity, you know, and elasticity, right?
But isn't that, I mean, again, because, but isn't that,
but it's still titles, right?
it's still titles, but the thing is taxonomy, classification. I mean, one of the areas that I'm really steeped in right now is the classification and enumeration and categorization. I mean, they're all pretty much the same thing, right? They're the same word, but then it depends on what discipline you are looking at and through. I'm most interested in kind of networks of care and how that's, you know, that kind of results and manifests out in biotech, you knowing my experience in biotech, but how that actually shows up in the world, you know, and how the way that we classify humans and how they are then classified to different conditions and disease states, etc. Those are the types of things that are like most kind of top of mind. But obviously, to return back to Wunderkammer, you know, I don't see that as, you know, I don't see that as too terribly different than what, say, like Internet Archive, you know, or you know, oh my gosh, what is this?
Wayback Machine?
No, not the Wayback Machine. The Printed Web Project. Oh,
Kenneth Goldsmith, right? Was that the one you were talking about? Oh, because he, like, the one where he printed the internet.
Yeah, no, Printed Web by Paul.
Yeah.
I don't want to mispronounce his name. Soulelis.
Souellis.
Yeah.
I'll just spell it.
Yeah. Paul, I'm so sorry if you're listening or will listen to this. No, but I remember meeting Paul at one of the first Theorizing the Web conferences, and that's actually our origin story is very much connected to the Theorizing the Web conference in 2013, because I actually found, and this is so interesting, Carla, because you say that, you know, well, writing's not my thing, and that's actually how I found you. I knew that you were an artist, but I read your writing before I looked at your artwork. And one of the things that you wrote about, and maybe it was a presentation or a transcription of a presentation, but something that really stuck with me and like was deeply resonant was this idea that gender, or what is it? Pixels don't have genders, they're not racialized, and then we do that. We do that to pixels, we do that to language, we do that to all these things that we're confronted with, right? And that is one of the things that I kind of feel is also just kind of indicative of human nature. We have to name things in order to kind of navigate and function around them and have some kind of positionality around them. BT dubs, I wanted to let you know that I binged on Lovecraft Country after a conversation.
What were your thoughts? Everybody, this is how we, you know, flow. Yeah, this is our flow.
Conversation. This is so, you know, and it's always a dream for me to talk to you, because I feel we can just talk for like 5 hours and just scratch the surface, right? But I think one of the things that really stood out to me was initially, obviously kind of racist technology. So that's a very Ruha Benjamin, you know, where
I have some of her quotes up right now from an earlier talk today. Yeah.
That's definitely someone who really came to mind. I mean, obviously, you know, Ruha Benjamin's work is very also much a part of my research as I'm looking at race and technology, but most, I mean, this is so strange because I don't really get to talk about my research, but I am interested in kind of the debate around data colonization versus data sovereignty, but then also how it's related to how data gets, collected, and then how it's kind of weaponized, and more often than not, you know, weaponized, to further kind of take away, you know, just inalienable rights from Black, brown, indigenous, queer, trans folks, people of color. And I mean, those are the things that I'm thinking about. But I wanted to go back to why we were geeking out about that, because I think a lot of what you know, to kind of circle it back around to Wunderkammer, one of the other things I was paying close attention to in Lovecraft Country was the kind of geographic, you know, object-oriented tropes. So like the maps and the Ori, which is kind of like the model of the solar system, and what does it mean to be in transit? What does it mean for someone's body to always be like literally on the run? And, you know, my really dear friend Indira Allegra and we have so many conversations about this too, where they brought up this idea of density. Like when they move, because they do performance work, they do poetry, all of this stuff, there is a density that they have to be mindful of. And so usually what's connected to that is an object that positions you in the world somehow. So those are some of the, you know, light ideas, but those are some of the ideas that I thought about when I was watching it after our conversation.
Yeah, and definitely flipping the script. By the way, I'd just like to introduce everyone to Carla Gannis, who's also here tonight, and I don't want to leave Carla Gannis out. Carla Gannis is a cross-platform avatar for recursive life action generative adversarial network. Thank goodness 20 years ago I decided to change my name to Gannis, so it fit very well to create or to begin to collaborate with Carla Gannis. And she's just hanging out in the simulation of Telematic Gallery in virtual reality. And then in terms of objects, I mean, you know, what's been interesting for me throughout this extended show is the show first launched in March 14th. So much has happened since then. And it launched on the Ides of March, by the way. A kind of an omen, right? And then a few days later, of course, we closed it. And with all of these cultural shifts afterwards, you know, I was reading your website today. You know, I read quite a few of your essays, just reread in return to some of your earlier work today, but also just some of your notes where you're just like, they're so cathartic, where you're just like, take it easy on yourself. It's okay. Create if you need to create. No judgment. But if you need to pause, pause. And for many years in my life, I've been kind of, I don't know, you know, Clark knows about this, you know, this kind of work ethic, which you start to realize that work ethic, labor, all of that is also something, you know, in terms of constructed realities, you know, we are participating in the construction of a reality. Right? And even though we're becoming more and more atomized, and when we have, you know, glasses or contacts, it might be far more atomized, and, you know, we'll be in so many different bubbles, it'll be really difficult to determine what one reality everybody agrees on is, right? But back to the Wunderkammer, when I first conceived the project, I was just so overwhelmed by so much going on in the world, right? And I, in addition to being an artist, in grad school to pay for college and grad school, I taught both aerobics, that's embarrassing to say, but I couldn't pay for school otherwise, and I worked in libraries. So can you imagine, you know, I'm teaching aerobics, you made the big money there, and then I worked in libraries because, you know, my grandmothers have 8th grade educations, my mother went to high school, and so for me, education was, you know, the way to really kind of understand the world through a different lens, and also to, you know, move to the Northeast. Anyway, enough of that.
Really quick, Carla, could you, for those that might not be familiar, could you define Wunderkammer?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, because I'm kind of launching into this project Wunderkammer and kind of the genesis for it. I mean, so a Wunderkammer is actually a Wunderkammer. I am not German. And so it's the precursor to the museum, right? So a 16th and 17th century kind of novel approach to collecting and archiving, right? And generally, it was an explorer or a person who had collected things from their travels. So a lot of times it was exotic things where a colonial perspective can come in, or, but also it wasn't just artifacts of the real, so to speak. Oftentimes it was dealing with mythologies, it was dealing with fictions. But because this is predating the museum and those kind of curatorial practices that we are familiar with today, the person who generated or built the Wunderkammer could kind of take any sorts of license in terms of, you know, the way that fictitious or uncanny things, you know, unreal things, mythological notions mixed with actual artifacts, actual historical objects, right? And so all of these objects were intermingled in this way that to me feels akin to the reality, or one of the realities we live in today, right? When you think about going on the internet, like in that absurd essay, I was talking about an essay I shared with Dorothy recently, apologies, but we'll kind of unpack that as we talk. You know, I was talking about Googling and our kind of faith and trust, right? And that algorithm. I mean, I think less and less so now, right? But like, you don't know what you're going to get. You don't even know what you're going to get when you go on Wikipedia. I mean, one of your articles, I really, the open internet from virtuality to physicality, you know, this tangibility of objects and downloading and remixing things, but like these remixed things, the things you're downloading, you don't even know the veracity of them, right? We live in an age of deep fakes. We live in an age of fake news. And so, you know, people have all these collections. A lot of times, you know, I'll post something and then I'm like, did I check the source for that? Because I found that on Pinterest, right? So again, we find ourselves in a world where truth and fiction kind of inhabit the same space simultaneously, and we're kind of navigating through that and finding our own truth or sense of reality in that mix.
Yeah,
that was a long-winded definition.
No, it was good. It was great. I think, well, also what the piece that you're talking about, it was when I was looking at Stephanie Saihuko's work, who is a very Bay Area based artist. She is UC Berkeley faculty in you know, in the arts and sculpture as well. But I was thinking about that in terms of, you know, what she had to go through in terms of, you know, creating this library, this kind of open library, and what it meant for people to be able to kind of go to the installation and print out Frankenstein. And what would that feel like? What would that look like? Where did you have to go? And kind of looking at the different places, you know, on the, you know, on the dark web, so to speak, of where you could, you know, or like LimeWire, like where could you actually look for certain objects that, you know, you couldn't necessarily have the object, but you could have maybe the simulation of it. And I don't even want to go as far as getting all Baudrillard about it, because, you know, a downloadable file is not necessarily, you know, full on simulacrum, but, you know, it's kind of treads along that territory. But, you know, yeah, I totally get it. I get the site that, you know, the kind of, I think that's also kind of the complicated nature of the Wunderkammer, just as a concept alone. You know, I remember I was talking to, you know, another really dear friend, Xiaowei Wang, who, you know, wrote, just a plug for all these wonderful people. They wrote a book, Blockchain Chicken Farm, that's actually coming out in October, next month. And, you know, we had this conversation around earlier on, because we're kind of on the same grad school path. We're kind of, you know, doing our qualifying exams at the same time. And, you know, one of the many conversations likewise with them, I remember asking a really complicated question around geography as a discipline, because just like art, it's a very colonial project. And then now seeing, oh, this is why geography is actually important, because it goes back to what are the objects and things that are collected from certain spaces and regions of the world that then enable us to, you know, you know, what, like, not just understand, but how do we kind of honor and respect those different stories? You know, like, do we really have to kind of, it's like, it's really touchy, and maybe I'm like being clumsy with my words here, but it's like contemporary geographers, especially like, you know, Camilla Hawthorne, who, you know, who looked at Black geographies of the Mediterranean. It's just like, how do we start to decolonialize these old world practices and disciplines by, you know, not maybe being so object oriented? And I know maybe I'm kind of being a contrarian a little bit here, because Wunderkammer is about that, is, you know, it arguably is about, you know, what does it mean to fetishize objects, at least for me,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
I mean,
when I
that's one
talked
of the
about
reasons
digital
why
hoarding, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, people also hoard like websites. You know?
Of course. And like my first job in New York was databasing a library, right? I was coming out of an MFA program with a painting degree and was either going to wait tables or database this library and learn library science on the fly. So I took 3 months just, you know, immersing myself and teaching myself how to database. I mean, this is the early days of the internet, but like, you know, that's when I started to obsessively collect things, digital things that are ineffable seemingly, right? That have no weight. Of course we know, right, they do. But you know, and really starting to think about that. And I have thousands of hard drives filled with digital images and objects. And I actually have them all in categories and, you know, and then I cross-reference them. And so it just ultimately seemed like I needed to do this project because I have this 25-year practice of kind of both digitally hoarding, but also categorizing and collecting all of these digital things. So even the objects on the cabinet in the physical gallery are all things I ordered from the internet. There are 3 objects that are actually things I 3D printed, and the other things are all things, you know, I type in a category, and that's what becomes fascinating too, and also problematic. Like Lajanae McMillan's Black Movement Project is, you know, case in point, where she has, you know, she started kind of really exploring places like Mixamo, for example, where you can download 3D models with these mocaps, right? And all the dances are just co-opted. And so they're taken from the original, authentic creator of the dance, right? And there's no attribution. And so then they just kind of get generated as some 3D model. And so they're totally no longer contextualized. So that's something else, is like the signs and signifiers of all of these objects. And so as I was going through, you know, all of these 3D sites and also, you know, craft shops, various places. I mean, I spent months, you know, in preparing for to produce the physical cabinet, just going through all of these different sites. And really, I've kept lists, which I intend to publish. I have a year at Newing, so we talk about this project as a project that is, you know, ongoing. And so I'm planning on, you know, extending this project in various ways. One, in bringing more people in to have these conversations actually in the virtual reality part, but also to publish the list I have. So I've kept a list of every one of the objects and its sources. So there is an attribution list for the objects that appear, objects or gifts and various things that appear in the virtual reality part or portion of the Wunderkammer and in the physical gallery, you know. And so, but like one other thing, in all this data and all these objects that we're accumulating and we're trying to categorize, again, it's almost like, okay, who's actually going to be able to parse all of that? Are we now starting to, as we, like the quantified self movement, all these movements, are we generating things for future intelligences? Because it's going to be beyond the capacity of a single human brain to parse and kind of understand and contextualize, you know? So those are other things I'm thinking about. And then of course, in the past 6 months, you know, recognizing that originally the desktop version of the Wunderkammer, now I'm saying it with, you know, with a German accent, the Wunderkammer. I'm just going to say www.Wunderkammer is the name of my project. And, you know, at first, I with everything going on, I couldn't work, right? I think quite a few of us couldn't. And then I was like, well, how can I kind of go back to this project and, you know, what is it that I could do at this point in time? And my thought was to make it accessible, because a desktop version of VR requires a very specific kind of computer with, you know, certain computing power, mega computing power, a headset that is generally shared in a public space. And so, you know, building it in social VR with those limitations, because the desktop VR, you can also, which you can't do in the physical gallery, throw all the objects around. So you can also change taxonomies, you can take objects. And so I was actually providing users, visitors, the agency to critique the way that I had categorized things. They could move them around. Unfortunately, with the social VR, I don't have that option. And so I created these really kind of hyper animated cabinets, and to in some way at least express how chaotic all of these classifications and taxonomies and the way we're sorting, how chaotic that is or feels to me. And, you know, and then as I kind of open up this project more, I want to actually interview and create avatars who can express things either through an academic viewpoint or through a personal viewpoint where they're actually grounding it. Because I've also spent 1.5 years training in AI on all of these different categories. So on decolonization, on female identified comedians, on endangered species. So I've been training this AI, and so the entire physical cabinet and virtual cabinet are lined with the images it's generated, but now I want to go further with grounding it in these human stories and these human positionalities, because I think it's essential we still kind of foreground that too. Any thoughts, opinions, disagreements?
No. I mean, I have just, my mind is kind of just, I feel there's so much rhizomatic thinking right now in my head because I can go in so many directions.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I think of Data from Star Trek and the emotion chip, you know, like there was like that episode where
Carla Gannis based on Data.
But yeah, it's this idea where there's certain kind of, you know, how would one compartmentalize to be effective, like an effective AI? Like what does you know, because I start thinking about if you're building this corpus of data for this, you know, this AI, there's a certain type of, you know, like I think I was talking to a friend, another really good friend, Forrest McGarvey. We've been exchanging these messages about, you know, what's at stake for us, you know? So in my mind, if you're feeding and creating a corpus of data or a data set, what's the why? Like, what is how is that an intervention into the way that we, you know, start thinking about how data might be used? You know, I mean, obviously we were talking earlier about the social dilemma, which I have some criticisms about it. I think that there were some good aspects of it, but we don't need to get into that unless people really have a question about it. But I think that's why the project for me, it's very rife with all of those kind of contentious things that I feel about the art world, where I don't like the unhealthy ecosystem. And I've been on record, I've said numerous times how I love art, but I don't think I will ever come to like, and I think this is the case for you and many other people. We had so many discussions around this where, you know, the art world is so, I don't know, it's just equally nefarious place, you know, and it doesn't exactly make me feel that I could kind of, like, your project for me is kind of a response to that. You know, I actually really love the fact that you can throw objects around in the kind of digital space that you've created. It did kind of make me think about this one show that I curated on privacy and its relationship to gentrification in San Francisco and in Oakland back in 2015. And one of the pieces was, it was co-created by Kaleo, Matteo Battani, and Colleen Flaherty. And they basically used the glitch that happened in The Sims, where there was this problem with homelessness in the games, The Sims. And they used that as a point of departure to create an installation that would, behind this whack-a-mole installation, behind it, you could actually see the Sims forum on how people were discussing how to get rid of this homeless problem in The Sims. And then they created physical objects that kind of reference that discussion that was happening in the forum. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because Mateo and Colleen didn't, to them, the objects in the gallery were not precious, but I remember the gallery sitter was like horrified because people kept stepping on the yellow figures and Mateo and Colleen intentionally wanted them on the floor. And we forgot to tell the gallery sitter that, actually. So people kept stepping on all these yellow figurines. And then, you know, I remember she texted me or called me and she's like, oh my God, people are stepping on, maybe I need to move it. I go, no, actually that's intentional. They actually want them to be destroyed, because it's this kind of contentious nature of, you know, yeah, we're making art, but this isn't supposed to be, this is kind of supposed to be a conversation piece within your own kind of self, or with the people that you're with, and what it meant to kind of intervene with the piece that was there, you know, and the piece that should have been kind of next to the installation, but now it's destroyed, right?
Well, yeah, because the art world is so much about fetishizing the object. And, you know, we think about one of the first artists, at least Western artists, who, you know, is challenging those notions is Duchamp, right? And he puts a urinal in, you know, a major exhibition, and everybody's horrified. And now that urinal, or actually a replica of that urinal, or 5 editions of replicas, you know, is now worth, I have no clue, but I'm sure quite a lot of money, right? And we fetishize the object, and also scarcity. That is, and again, I still will suggest that there are more, I mean, there's this one mainstream art world that we all kind of inhabit, some of us more on the fringes than others, but there are other smaller, you know, art worlds within that where I think we can find community and support. But again, back to like scarcity and ubiquity. So like the internet model is all ubiquity. Like the more something gets liked, the more something, I mean, we know this for 10 years of you know, various people talking about this, but you know, the scarcity and the fetishization of the object is kind of the history of art, or at least of, I guess, the beginning of the salon, you know, and the history of a particular, like 17th, 18th century salon, and the emergence of museums and then galleries, right? Predating that, of course, if you read Lewis Hyde's The Gift, predating that, of course, art had an entirely different definition and function. And like to hold on to an object meant the artwork died. You had to give it away, you had to share it, right? And so, you know, that's something else. Like, I think these conversations are important because I think right now a lot of people are really thinking about how can we unlearn, how can we dismantle, how can we kind of agree to a new construction of reality, and what could that look like, right? But it's really difficult to conceive that on your own. I mean, that's why I want to continue to open up this project and get more voices, more representation, you know, involved, because, you know, to really start thinking about like the way we define art or objects or spaces, or, you know, what new can we kind of, you know, speculate on. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, well, my brain's going all over the place now.
I know. This is what happens with us.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of, it's so funny, as I mentioned to you earlier, how, you know, the description of the talk was, you know, we're talking about Wunderkammer, but then we're also talking about, you know, post-humanist, feminist futures and decolonial practices. And I think it's also, I mean, admittedly, I'm still learning a lot about, you know, what it means to even have decolonial methodologies. I mean, my goodness, Latoya Smith was, I don't know if with the latest on the news, but, you know, she spoke out against kind of, you know, what was happening at her university. I mean, this is a leading scholar on, you know, that is about, you know, all about, their scholarship is all about decolonial methodologies, and what do we have to keep in mind when we're thinking about, you know, what it means to you know, honor the study of, you know, people and places. And I don't know, I also just am thinking about, you know Ha's work and Stephen Ha's work, and kind of like standing nearby or speaking nearby as opposed to speaking about. So I think a lot of that is, I mean, that's also something that you've kind of played around with in your work, this idea of like, you are not, you're inspired by the world and what's around you. You're not exactly trying to just say, you know, I think that's also this whole idea of this endeavor of attribution for you is so, it's so commendable, you know, because I remember when you were telling me about the project initially, I thought to myself, wow, that is such a massive undertaking, even just at the conceptual level when we think about attribution in our world now. And as I mentioned, you know, you brought up the Wayback Machine and kind of connected to the Internet Archive, where, you know, it kind of makes me think of, again, because since we're riffing, you know, about everything right now, and, you know, I think of, and I brought this up during a artist panel talk last week with, you know, three Bay Area based artists for an event, because we were talking, it was Hisum Kwan, and it was Jillian Crochet and Miguel Novello. And I think one of the, you know, I say so many things, so I'm just like, oh, what did I say? But I could have sworn that I mentioned Sadia Hartman's idea of critical fabulation. So this idea of pulling from the archives and then surmising, well, what did happen at this time in history based on the objects that I see. So if we think about the Wunderkammer and for whom it is made for, and your idea of it being made for people, but it's really just something that people can contribute to and could be a part of, is quite a departure in terms of, you know, of a lot of other projects that, you know, I mean, it kind of treads this really kind of thin line of like also having some game mechanics. So to go back to what you were saying, where you're allowing people to be physical with objects in a digital space, but, you know, but I'm also very curious, how do you feel about the objects now? So I'm kind of interrupting myself because this question just popped up in my head. How do you feel about the objects now at Telematic, now that you know that people are unable to physically be there together, kind of maybe observing the objects? They could still observe them, yes, you know, socially distanced, 6 feet apart, but not in the way that we're used to. Like, how do you feel about the objects now? The physical objects, not necessarily like the Wunderkammer kind of digital space.
This is something, when I stopped painting 2 decades ago, I had friends at the time who were painters who basically, you know, tried to kind of stage these interventions with me. They told me I would never have an art career if I kept doing this digital stuff. Back then I was building Flash websites. I was, you know, and so they were like, you're never going to have an art career. It's over. And then I did get some attention for some digital print work I was doing, and I was offered these shows, but they'd be like, oh, but can you make paintings? So on like 3 different occasions, because I have painting shops, so I'd paint the physical galleries of the wall, just straight on the wall. So for a month, they had that physical artifact. But if they wanted to sell something, they had to sell something digital, because I really wanted to kind of open people up. And of course, this is a long time ago. We have there are different attitudes towards, you know, a digital practice today. But back then, there was still a lot of resistance. And so it was early on, you know, I was like, okay, I will do the painting for you. I will give you the physical thing that seems so important, you know, and that can be, but it's going to be destroyed in a month. And I put a lot of labor and time into them. And I'm like, that is getting destroyed, because I want to actually commit to this digital practice, to where that can take me, you know. And it is definitely much more rhizomatic. It's sometimes more painful when you have to deal with the obsolescence of technology, and you have to pivot, or you have to, you know, document really well, and these kind of things. And so with the Wunderkammer too, you know, one thing, like, I created this holodeck, Hamlet on the holodeck, I've been teaching from that book for ages. And Yeah. And so I really wanted to stage it so that you have, you know, kind of this physical reality component. Then you have this intermediary space, which is the holodeck that you walk into with these augmented reality kind of avatars. They are, you know, the people who will lead you through the virtual reality phase. They're, I call them the virtues and vices, right? And, but I also wanted to, because my whole practice has been also about a lot of digital semiotics, high and low, like what, talking about hierarchies. So like the carpet, like that's a hand painted, like if you see, that's the, oh, I'm pointing to something and you all are looking at me on a screen, but if you look at Clark, that's hand painted on the wall, right? And thanks to the assistants, not just myself, some amazing assistants, they're all listed on the website. But that's hand painted on the wall. That carpet is from Lawnmower Man. Anybody remember that reference? It's such a cheesy movie, right? But C. Carla Gannis is actually wearing a Lawnmower Man t-shirt. But it's a carpet too. So I also wanted to kind of deal with this kind of domestic space, because the holodeck today is in all of our homes. I didn't know at the time when I created that March 14th, I didn't know how much the holodeck would become all of our homes, because now we work, we teach, we, you know, sometimes party, me not so much, whatever, we do all of that now in our homes. So we all have those personal holodecks. And so in a way, you know, things I was already kind of conjuring by making a carpet and, you know, painting the walls were about that. But also in painting the walls, again, I've made this painting for a gallery show, but it all gets destroyed at the end. And I don't think I'm nihilistic, but I've had many people actually grow frustrated with me in the fact that I often am not as attached to physical objects as I am to virtual ones. And I don't even know if it's virtual objects, it's more like concepts, because we like dematerialization of the art object. You know, new media art comes out of conceptual art and the dematerialized art object, right? But then I'm a maximalist and I'm totally horror vacuum. So I create all these objects, but then I'm like, oh, well, if they decay, if there's entropy, you know, I did it. It was a performance, you know? Yeah.
I mean, there is a degradation that happens with digital objects too, you know? I mean, we all know that, you know, but I think that's kind of one of the fascinations I've always had about the work that you kind of delved into. I mean, I mean, it starts off from this very kind of micro place of the pixel, and then it kind of ends up being, you know, this kind of universe that you've made, you know? I mean, I think for me, it's a little bit on the opposite end in terms of practice, because I am mostly fascinated by the extremely private. So when I say the extremely private, I'm talking about one's body. So how does, say, you know, medical history actually affect, because that's a type of media that, you know, the only people that are privy to, say, my media, right, are like a handful of doctors probably, and maybe my mom, you know, like just, and not even my mom, like, you know, it's, so I'm concerned actually with the interior to the degree that you have to, my practice is much more involved in the storytelling aspect of, well, what are the things that we need to pay attention to actually manifest a system of care, or whether it's, you know, medications, whether it's, you know, physical kind of support for people within this kind of larger web. And it's interesting that you brought up Janet Murray's work, because I've read her numerous times for mostly for playable media, you know, like kind of delving into the practice of, and it's also this kind of really seemingly, and I feel for the undergrads that I work with, because they have to talk about the difference between the narratology and the ludology.
Ludology, yes,
and, you know, kind of that debate, which a lot of students are really, they're super smart about it, and they're like, why are we even having this debate about, you know, VR and video games? And you know,
especially that debate started like 25 years ago.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just this idea. And so of course I'm of the Janet Murray camp that thinks that there are stories in everything and anything, and you can kind of make games out of, like, games are a part of that, or VR and AR and experiences are actually a part of what, you know, she has kind of mentioned. But the reason why I'm kind of trying to fit it in is because something I've been reading lately is The Hologram, which is by Cassie Thornton, because, you know, it's so much about how do we create systems outside of the healthcare system that we see now, which obviously is very broken. So kind of thinking about, you know, and Casey Thornton's idea of the hologram is how do we create peer-to-peer healthcare networks? And so, you know, and that, so it's a little less, like, the objects are really specific, like they're hyper specific. It's not necessarily, you know, it's, I don't really have objects in kind of my work. If there is an object, it's like one thing, which would be the phone, you know, because that's kind of the central object that I'm working with. And, you know, interactive voice response systems, I've been so fascinated by how those work, and the voice. And the voice.
What about the ontology of objects? So if we wanted to get into object-oriented ontology, and someone 1,000 years from now finding this and having, because it's just a block of, you know, silicone, or, you know, and like the ontology of these objects, and also, you know, I don't know if I've really, like with the social VR piece, you know, I didn't, again, have that latitude to kind of explore that as much as then the desktop VR, where the objects kind of quake, right? You know, and yeah. But yeah, I mean, I know our practices are really different, but that's what's so fascinating, is that there are still so many, when we start talking, like we could come at things from totally two different vantage points and with different aesthetics and different intentions, and then like find these intersections. That's why I think it's so important, you know, in terms of tech teams, dev teams, you know, you need the humanities person, you need the artist, you need the, you know, the sociologist.
Well, but I think the one thing that is very much in common, especially now that we've been talking for almost an hour now, which
we've got to get to a little feminism.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you know, this is like one of those unfiltered conversations where I always think to myself, oh my gosh, usually there's so much more polish. I feel very clumsy with my words today, you know?
Oh my gosh, you're never clumsy.
No, well, that's very generous of you. But I think one of the aspects that is very similar and very much an intersection between the two of us is that we're both fascinated by classification. Because for me, you know, I actually have a book. I'm literally reaching for it. It's, you know, it is called Sorting Things Out. And one of my mentors, Nancy Chen, who is a medical anthropologist, actually suggested it to me. It's a book on classification and its consequences. It's by Jeffrey Bauer and Susan Lee Starr. But the reason why it's such an important book is because it actually talks about how people are diagnosed and what goes into that. And I think another scholar that has really deeply impacted, you know, the way that I've been thinking about this too is oh gosh, well, let me just speak to this, because I you know, I had to speak at 4S last year, and 4S is this conference where it's a lot of like science and technology scholars, and meeting some really great people there, and there was a scholar there that talked about how, you know, she was really confounded in having done her residency and realizing that how this is kind of a no-brainer. I mean, everyone knows this, but when you think about race within the medical industrial complex and healthcare, the objects kind of fall away when you're trying to gain someone's trust, because you have to actually know them as a person versus as a subject. And oftentimes, you know, Black, brown, especially Black women are treated as subjects,
right?
And not cared for. And this is the reason why, for me, I guess this is one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated by, you know, Bauer and you know, and Starr's book, and you know, those claims of why we ought to actually look at the kind of consequences of what it means to classify different types of bodies. I think also, I've been thinking about this a lot more because people keep wondering about a vaccine, and I you know, I have to kind of, I think to myself, you know, gosh, how horrible is it that probably the US doesn't actually know that it takes that a year to come up with a vaccine is actually extremely short. To try to do something in a year is actually unethical in biotech. That's, you know, it's like to fast track something, it can be done, but you're asking human bodies to do something that they cannot do like at the drop of a hat. Like, you know, and I think that's one of the things that I really, that kind of going back to the objects and the Wunderkammer, you know, you're talking about this nihilism that you have with your objects and how they get destroyed. I really love that. But it also kind of reminds me of how, you know, I think about Christina Lyon's work, who was doing, you know, her scholarship in Colombia and looking at chemical warfare and like asking like her big research topic, and or not research, her big research question that she's been grappling with for many years is, what does it mean to actually measure something that decays or erodes over time? So, you know, what does it mean to not have something in its original state, but it is causing all of this havoc, right? And, you know, that, so for me, I think like I'm equally fascinated by that. I'm equally fascinated by things that are ephemeral, you know, in that, well, maybe that's not the right word, but like, there's like a temporality to the materials that I'm interested in. And, but again, the kind of intersection is my fascination and maybe obsession with the classification of those things, because, you know, such as, you know, illness, conditions, sickness, you know, how do those things then add to the amalgamation of a person? Because those sometimes, sickness, illness, diseases, they will go away, and sometimes they won't. So it's, you know, I feel like I'm dealing with very complicated data and matter that I don't even know where to begin sometimes, or I feel like that's a very much a conundrum for me, you know.
Well, as an artist working on this project, the conundrum, you know, something I think we had talked about was like that the world of images, you know, can be treacherous, but I don't want them to be violent. Mm-hmm. But there's been a real fear. I'm an artist, and generally, you know, I'm not a sociologist. I'm not, you know, a biologist. Like, I don't have any of those really. I'm not a Ph.D. I don't have any of those titles, right? And so I'm reflecting on this, you know, post-museum culture, post-data quantification for everything. And I'm like, what mistakes am I going to make? Because I'm not an expert, right? And so I've had that real fear of, you know, making mistakes, and the slippage that visual imagery usually allows for, right, can be treacherous. But we are now understanding also the violence that is just kind of implicit and embedded in so much of our culture, right? And really trying to be, you know, attuned to that, which leads me to one other thing I'd like to talk to you about is in the cabinet, I have 2 cabinets dedicated to comedy. One is Comedy is Sad, and one is female identified comedians from around the world, paying tribute to them, women or female identified women of various abilities, various comedy styles, but just that was my sense of the place where the woman has the voice and historically has been maligned. You know, women are never considered funny, and it's also a way to, like, you know, shut up, you know, a female up, right? But more importantly, because that now I'm starting to get, you know, granular, comedy, and comedy is salve. Over the past few months, I was like, do I include those cabinets? Can we laugh? Is it okay? Right?
Well,
how do you feel about that?
Well, no, we can laugh. I think that's also just a very much it's also acknowledgement, you know, of the situation. I think sometimes for me, it's been really challenging to think about the world that we live in and not feel guilty for, you know, for saying, yeah, I'm actually well because I'm able to do the things I need to do to survive. And I'm just doing the best that I can, because that's all we can do. And, you know, we do need comedy, but I think that's also the frustration of, I remember one time I saw this graphic and it was just, it made me so angry because it was an article. I mean, it was just, this is like kind of, this is when media upsets me and frustrates me. It was like a graphic about people's perception of useless jobs, and like a resounding 75% of the people that were surveyed, and people forget that, you know, surveys have a specific number, so it's not kind of, you know, you don't have a big sample set here, where 75% of these, you know, a couple thousand people that were surveyed said that artists are, that's not a real job. And that was this year, because it was that whole, it was kind of this ongoing debate of you know, what kind of jobs people should be thinking about during this time, because, you know, the whole definition of essential workers or frontline workers, and then I the reason why I was so angry about that is because I thought, oh, okay, so but then when people are bored, or when people need to engage in escapism, art is the first place they go to. And I think that's kind of the strange kind of that's kind of the vicious cycle of capitalism as well. You know, I think earlier you said something about productivity, or this idea of having to make stuff at this time, and taking a respite from that, because capitalism, the unfortunate byproducts of capitalism are that you're never going to be good enough. You never feel good enough. You're never as good as the person that you're looking at on social media. And I think that this is pretty tragic. You know, I think, I mean, I have so much more to say about that, and how to create kind of like a post-humanist feminist future is just kind of, well, yeah, we have to kind of, you know, the DIY is in anything, like do it yourself, literally, like as I mentioned with Thornton's work, and I've been thinking about how we create these kind of peer-to-peer healthcare networks, and like my own work is very much related to that idea, is where can we find kind of the warp zones. You know, I'm thinking about my, you know, little kid days of playing Super Mario, and it's like, well, where's the green pipe that's gonna lead us straight to, this is so gendered, the princess, you know, or like the thing that we just need to get to do the thing that we need to be in the world and create our own interventions. And like dissent is such a big theme in my writing, in my creative writing, and the interactive pieces that I'm working on. Dissent is actually a huge part of that. Like, what would it look like if you knew and had all the information, but someone said, well, you could do this you can take this alternative, and then find these kind of, you know, underground, quote unquote, networks that would be able to kind of get you the health care you need, the shelter you want, for you to just live, you know. That's like, I think it's just been really frustrating to kind of be immersed in that world. And I have to admit, you know, to circle back around to what you were asking, I need to laugh, and I need to feel, I need to kind of be steeped and immersed in satire sometimes to see the absurdity of the situation that we're in, you know, because I think in, you know, the fact that you've talked to me about this a couple of years ago. You told me about, you know, how you were like collecting kind of, you know, information and clips and research around, you know, comics. And I don't know if I told you this, but I mean, I couldn't complete the course, but there was like an 8-week workshop. I signed up for a stand-up comedy workshop.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Yes.
And Kevin Kamiya, who's he's a really talented comic, and I really enjoy his stuff, you know, tremendously. He was leading the workshop, and I couldn't do it. I literally could not. I could do like 2 weeks of it, and I had to step back and say, you know, Bindlestiff, take the money, I'll support you. I can't do the rest of the workshop, but I will say, in the 2 weeks that I took these kind of, you know, I would spend time with these other comics, and comic writing is very hard. I will say that. It's like, I think what people don't give comics, I mean, artists, like this is the same thing, you know, you're kind of, whether you're improvising or whether you're speaking about life through this kind of maybe warped or kind of a, you know, alternate kind of lens, that is a very treacherous kind of ground to tread, because it takes a very skillful writer / comic to actually not be offensive, but be humorous and make the listener, you know, it will reveal something about kind of the condition of humanity. And that's something that I learned. I do actually want to go back, but I will say taking a stand-up comedy workshop is not the same on Zoom, because you can't hear people laughing, and it's such an embodied experience. And the thing that is the barrier between you and your audience is it's basically the microphone. So it's kind of like this very quintessential like soul activity that that's so excruciatingly vulnerable. And I feel when you told me that this was a part of the project, that was an aspect of the Wunderkammer that I deeply was most fascinated by, actually, you know?
So that avatar. It seems. I for some reason I just blew up. My voice blew up. I don't know what happened. But anyway, if we're still like live or whatever, that character, you know, because I have all of these different avatars. So Lucille Trackball, that's their name, and they are an AI stand-up comedian. Yeah.
It's so great.
And then I have an influencer, synfluencer, and I have all these different kind of representations. Through the avatars. But Clark, I'm realizing we're past 8 o'clock. Are there any questions? Oh yeah, Dorothy, good. Do we have any questions?
You know, we've got a strong audience here, but so far the chat has been silent. There was some compliments to the informal enthusiasm in the exchange, and people seem to be enjoying it, but I've got no specific questions.
All right.
I mean, okay, thank you. I mean, Carla, if you want, I don't know if you have anything that you want to geek out over. I mean, I don't think we talked about this, but I mean, I mentioned it earlier before we started recording, was, you know, me reading Surrogate Humanity by Neda Tanasaski and Kalinda Vora, and these ideas of, you know, they're kind of looking at these concepts of like enchantment and disenchantment in technology, and how do we, you know, kind of the use of mechanical Turks or robotics to then create this kind of obedient, you know, neoliberal subject. You know, I don't want to get all geeky here now, right? But it's very much related to kind of even media. So like when we start thinking about how the ease of like using Amazon Echo or, you know, or Amazon Alexa, like what does it mean? Because that to me is very influential in my work, and I'm very much concerned with like audio constructs and you know, computational psychiatry, you know, like that's based off of the research of Beth Semmel, who's like really amazing, and I've been following their work, you know, for the past year when I met them last year. But that in and of itself is a different type of objecthood, is like the actual speaker, right? You know, and like, you know, these objects that kind of give us the illusion that that we can have this quote unquote embodied experience through a voice that's willing to be our assistant, you know?
Yeah, I was trying to, I still take analog notes, and I have hundreds of these, stacks and stacks. And I was trying to find a quote from a talk the other night. This week there have been quite a few talks. Give me 1 second and see if I can find it, or if my brain will work and I'll be able to find it. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time trying to do this. But it was basically, I was on a panel. I've been using this platform called Playform.io. And actually I'm going to be, you know, to train all the models for the Wunderkammer. So I have generated through this platform millions of images at this point, right? And really thinking about, you know, of course I'm working with small data, unscientific, of course, but, you know, just thinking about this nascent technology, and kind of one of the big issues right now is bias, right? And what are we teaching and what are we perpetuating? And so to kind of come up with these taxonomies and then to kind of grow, you know, or somehow participate and collaborate with this. I don't like to call it artificial. I think that's a false dichotomy. I prefer other intelligence or emerging intelligence rather than artificial. But anyway, so I also have created these 7 avatars that they all represent artificial intelligence or, you know, some kind of computer robotic, fictitious, totally speculative fiction, but they represent some different kind of embodiment, right? And other than Carla Gannis, who is gray-skinned like Data, all my avatars are multicolored because one other thing, talk about bias in white robots and how that is perpetuating racist stereotypes too. And then one of my robots, AIs that I created, her name is Lady Ava Interface. Who could I be, you know, not into? Lovelace. But she took over the Whitney's website for about 6 months at, you know, sunrise and sunset. But I was really thinking about embodied and disembodied. And like you're talking about the speakers and the ontology of these speakers, but also, you know, of course, Her was a really popular movie where, you know, I don't know how you felt about that. I felt like certain stereotypes were perpetuated even in, you know, the way that it was this female AI and his relationship to her and his expectations. Do you remember Her? That film?
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah,
I remember,
yeah.
With Joaquin Phoenix?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would totally remember. I mean, yeah, one of my really dear friends and I, we were awake till like 3 or 4 in the morning talking about that film.
Yeah, right. And so I think a lot about that and embodiment. And again, you know, I totally traverse the realm of the absurd. I sometimes feel like it undercuts my message because people just see kind of comedy or, you know, cartoonish things, but it's just kind of what comes out. And in creating Lady Ava Interface, she's assembled by emojis, you know, and she has cloud hair for the cloud and cookies for skin, you know, because it's cookies. But I had so much fun making her. And on the Whitney, instead of her giving advice like Alexa or Siri, of course it's, you know, like a female representation, although that is changing and you can change the voices now, but instead of, you know, this representation also of just the quotidian and the mundane, right? Like, here's your calendar, let's do this. And if they do tell you a joke, there was a great reporter a couple years ago who did stand-up comedy with all the different like Siri and Cortana, and I mean, it was just miserable. Their jokes were just so like bottom of the barrel. And so really thinking about it, and so, you know, in generating or kind of creating this persona, this avatar, you know, she like provides poetry, nonsensical poetry maybe, but like, you know, or tells you to water your plants with your tears, you know, and just like kind of trying to infuse technology. Who was it? Arthur C. Clarke said, I mean, it's a famous quote, right? Like, once we reach some pinnacle of tech, it's all magic, right? But I want to take everything we're experiencing seriously. We have to, or we're not going to survive as a species. The planet will survive, we're not going to survive. And or only 1% of a very, you know, specific population is going to survive and go to Mars, right? And so, you know, taking it seriously, but also like the idea of comedy as salve. I mean, historically, there is a lot of documentation of different cultures who found comedy and storytelling and humor as a way to actually continue to exist, to live, to get by. And so like infusing these things and even our technologies with poetry, humor, you know, like some sense of nonsense and absurdity, because like actually from the bird's eye view of this reality that we're all agreeing to, you know, kind of live in, abide by its rules, etc. A lot of it is absurd, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and totally. I mean, I mean, yes. And I mean, shoot, I've been watering my plants with my tears for a minute, so it's okay.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, joking aside, and no pun intended in any of that. But like, I think, I don't know. I mean, I think that's kind of one of the reasons why when I think of, you know, different media such as her, for instance, but then I also think of, you know, when you were talking, I thought, oh, but then there's also kind of, you know, Jordan Peele's Get Out and the double consciousness, and it kind of goes back to the whole racist technology and how, what does it mean to be, to use different bodies for you know, I don't know, for one's livelihood. It's just like, it's kind of Lovecraft kind of is, I mean, they're both kind of, Jordan Peele also, along with Misha, worked on Lovecraft. Yeah.
Or a producer.
Producer. But I think you know, he's very consistently looking at double consciousness. But I think that's one of the things that needs to also change within like technological spheres and kind of, you know, whether it's VR, social VR, programming languages, obviously, you know, I'm very committed to open source software communities that I work within, but it's also acknowledging the kind of narratives that are that need to be kind of considered when creating the technologies. I mean, I'm not saying anything new, but I think that's one of the reasons why I feel like a lot of these pontificating kind of docu-series on this, you know, the great hack, the social dilemma, it's like, okay, I get it. We all know that that's the problem, but these are the types of interventions.
And we know you made your millions through it.
Well, yeah, but also we need to you know, like it's also kind of to ask, well, what are the interventions that can be made, or like that actually need to be a part of that process? Because it's not good enough to admit that these problems were kind of created without, well, we're just trying to make things. It's just, no, that this is the problem is, you know, I mean, I think that's kind of one of the reasons why, you know, so many people have this, at least I do, like having this kind of disdain for Amazon, for instance, because it has been built upon the technologies that have made it, you know, what it is today, because people really haven't questioned it, because it's kind of accepted as a technology that's become such a part of our lives.
If I can share something from something I wrote earlier today to prepare for a talk, but it's so just kind of aligns with that. I was like, as an educator, I find it really important to unlearn some of the paradigms that have been set in the past regarding captains of industry and power brokerage. Like, I don't want to teach my students to aspire to be some singular creative genius, which is a complete myth anyway, who rises to the top of the heap through narcissism and greed. I want my students to learn how to be entrepreneurs or artists or creative technologists who understand the power of collaboration, of mutually supporting their peers, of recognizing the necessity of empathy, equity, and inclusion. Like, if we're really gonna like survive as a species, right? I mean, by the way, I realize I say right a lot. It's something, look at this tick, so I won't keep asking you right. I'll just let you respond.
No,
you can right, wrong, whatever.
No, it's fine. I mean, I think that's all a part. I mean, even that in and of itself is, I love how, I mean, I think that's kind of the beauty of humanity. And, you know, we all have our different kind of nuances of speech and gesturing. And I, you know, even for myself as someone who is very, I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot too, is this idea that, you know, I have to really, I've been really, really deeply humbled in the past few years, just working with different scholars and kind of consuming the scholarship that I have been, because it just, it's, that's kind of the fear that I constantly have, is just, I don't know enough, but then when I do learn it, it's just this kind of abyss. You realize, oh my gosh, the more that I learn, the more I realize how much I didn't know. And
right.
I think that's just a part of what needs to happen in the world that we're living in. I mean, the fact that Trump wants some pro-American curriculum, like that's very scary. I mean, I was scared.
It is terrifying.
You know, the 2016 elections, but now we're kind of in a space where we have to create our own ecosystems that actually enable, like that actually enable the work that many of us have been doing for quite some time. And I don't want to say to not let it go to waste, but that's a lot of pressure on communities, you know, to really kind of forge ahead and, you know, build upon, almost even asking, you know, again, Black, brown, indigenous, queer, trans folks to like work, you know, it's like, no, it's like the cis straight white man needs to fucking do the work, excuse my language. But, you know, I think that's like one of the frustrations that I've had, even in academia. I'm still one of the few people in, you know, the spaces that I'm in where I'm oftentimes the only woman of color and the only queer person. Maybe there's another person, but it's very few still. It's 20. And I think that's kind of the conundrum that I have always, that I knew that I would face, but I think that kind of goes back to how we started and why I have such a contentious nature of being called a critic scholar, because I feel like I'm just a lifelong learner. And I feel the students I work with teach me way more than I could ever imagine. And I think I'm also just, you know, I think I'm trying not to be so disillusioned so that I could be present for, you know, the artists, the writers, the engineers, the computer scientists, the doctors, nurses, whoever crosses my path in my life. I want to be just as present for all of them, for all these individuals. And I mean, I don't want to be, that sounds so Pollyanna, but I think that's kind of what I've been thinking about and striving for and towards as I'm continuing my work. But I think your work definitely accomplishes that. Like, not just Wunderkammer, like a lot of your works are always kind of pushing up against what it means to actually change, expand, and then flip what art actually means. And you've been doing that for a minute. So I really appreciate you, like, really taking the time to always have those conversations with me. Like, we've been having this ongoing conversation for years now, you know?
Yeah, wow. It was funny because I found that picture of us from 2016 last night, you know, and I was like, everything seemed like it was going to hell then.
Yeah.
But that's something else I think we have in common, and I often autocorrect, is because we both smile a lot, right, and laugh easily, and I sometimes, you know, am like kind of trying to balance between like having kind of Pollyannish attitudes, like, yes, if enough of us band together, we can do it, and you know, like all of these different parameters or titles or, you know, ways that we discriminate or exclude, right? Like, if enough of us band together, we're going to be able to succeed and create a better future, a future like A Woman on the Edge of Time, right? The 1978 book by Marge Piercy, where one of her futures, like, there are two possible trajectories, but the one future she imagines, you know, is just like, it is a utopia, but it's not perfect, which is a utopia. The actual etymology of the word does not mean perfection, but a society achieving some proximity to perfection, right? And but then I have that side of me that is like, you know, kind of Pollyannish, and then I have the other side who literally has to drink 3 cups of coffee just to move some mornings, because it's just abject, you know, existentialism, right? And it's a really strange kind of what is this thing, seesaw, you know, that I don't think we're alone, you know, in experiencing. But I know we're getting close to time because we're going to 8:30. I have one doubling quote that I know you know, Dorothy, but I just want to share it because I have it on hand, and I think it's so good because you were talking about Jordan Peele and doubling, and this is a Ruha Benjamin quote. The animating force of the new Jim Code is that tech designers encode judgments into technical systems, but claim that the racist results of their designs are entirely exterior to the encoding process. So racism thus becomes doubled, magnified, and then buried under layers of digital denial. And I'd just like to ask you, because you work in a coding community, you work with these languages, you know, what are the experiences you've had? How do you resist or work towards, you know, kind of correcting?
My goodness. Well, you know, Lauren McCarthy is a really dear friend and a colleague, and someone that I just I really don't know what I would do without them. I feel that we are constantly in conversation about race and politics and culture and what's happening in society. And, you know, it's funny, I actually was working on an essay, and, you know, she was one of the people that was looking at it. And it's basically kind of my frustration of people not being kind of conscious about how assimilation and acculturation has actually damaged a lot of what we're, you know, of like what we're seeing and experiencing now. You know, how do you actually honor and respect difference without minimizing, so that everyone is at some kind of level playing field? And, you know, I mean, yes, you want that, but at the same time, there are certain individuals that, you know, the system just really just utterly doesn't work for them. And so how do you become accessible and inclusive? And this is a whole nother conversation that we can get into, but inclusion is like lifelong practice. That's just not something that, you know, you take a course and then you're done and you know how to be inclusive. Like, that is a constant practice.
100%, right.
You know? And, you know, what does it mean to kind of, how do people listen to themselves? You know, is your language ableist? Are you being ableist? How are you not, you know, factoring in the needs of the community that you're serving? And I think one of the, I mean,
by the way, well, no, you keep talking, and then I have a book to, like, a book resource for you. Keep talking.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think one of, you know, it's so interesting because I feel when people talk about, say, like the, you know, the processing community, but more specifically the P5.js community or the P5.js editor communities, like, so many people will, you know, say the same thing. It's so welcoming. I'm a newbie. I don't know anything, but I feel like I can learn in this space. And a lot of it is because, you know, Lauren themselves and like Cassie Tarakajian, who, you know, like the creators of these platforms and these softwares, they know what it was like to be a beginner. They know what it was like to be someone who needed to kind of take it from square one. And for me, I really deeply appreciate that, because even as someone who is not, people make so many assumptions about me being a programmer just because I work for Processing Foundation. And so they assume that I know how to program. I do, but it's very basic skills. Like, I know how to make a text generator because I'm a writer. So that's kind of what I'm attracted to. And I know how to do certain syntax that will produce that, but I myself am still learning. But that community has taken years to build. And, you know, I remember telling Lauren, you know, my gosh, you know, this is the community you envisioned because you worked hard to see to that. And I think that that's kind of what I hope, even when I work with undergrads and students, you know, it means a lot to me when I see in their papers that I'm grading that they're quoting Fred Moten or Saidiya Hartman. It's just like, oh my gosh, you paid attention in class. That's amazing, you know? Or, you know, those are the things that really, I feel, when you interject and you give kind of, you know, digital technology kind of a literal face that it needs, you know, of all these people that are part of building these systems, it means it means a lot more to people. They want to invest in creating that change. And I mean, I don't know if that answers your question, but those are the types of things that I've been thinking about in the job that I've done for, oh my gosh, going on 3 years now, in addition to my own academic research, because it fits so beautifully. Like, I have to make these things connect. And I mean, that's kind of, you know, and again, it's just, it's a lot of hard work, and it's work for the long haul, not work so that you can perform it. It's you don't perform. I don't give a shit. If I'm not doing it in my personal life, and I'm not seeing to it that, again, there's these communities that really need the support and the place to be able to do the work that they're doing, then, like, that's a very personal matter to me. I have to make certain that that's being done on a personal level, not just, I think that's another frustrating, kind of infuriating aspect of this past year, is just performativity.
Yeah, I understand. That's another reason you've been kind of taking a break from social media.
Absolutely. Because I want to do the work. I want to do the work, and I want.
And you've been doing the work. You've been doing the work for years, right? I mean, I was going on your website today and I was like, 2012. Oh, I don't think I read that essay. You know, you've been doing the work for years. I mean, far beyond that, you know, 2012, right? And so it can be really frustrating when people are performative, like they're, you know, one weekend and you're like, wait, what? And especially when it becomes pejorative, and that's where it's just a very uncomfortable space, you know, where there's this performativity that also then starts to shame other people, and it just gets very complicated, I'll say.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
I know it's like 5:30 and I think it's 8:30 where you are.
Oh, right. Yeah. So Clark, cut us off.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Can you hear me still?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, good. My sound setup changed.
Do we still have any people watching this? Because Dorothy and I were like, this is just going to be us.
Absolutely. We've got fans. But thank you both. Again, it's Dorothy Santos. Appreciate the conversation. The ideas are still with me and will continue to resonate. I'm going to, and we're getting thank yous from Twitch. So bravo. And I'm going to sign off on the broadcast, but then we can hang out. So,
all right, yeah, we'll hang out.
Take care. Thank you all for
bye, everybody.
Our show. And again, we will be back next week with, where's my notes? Charlotte Kent and Ahmed Eldamal, and weeks of the Wunderkammer. Thanks again. Best wishes.
All right, take care, everybody.